What if your CEO and your production floor are both telling the truth, but they're looking at two completely different realities? Think about that for a minute. Your executive team is looking at revenue. They're looking at margins, EBITDA, cost savings, forecasts, budgets, and whether the company is hitting its targets. And they should be. That's what they're accountable for, to the board, to shareholders. They're accountable to employees, customers, and the long-term financial health of the company. But now walk out onto the production floor. The people there are experiencing something completely different. They're seeing the machine that's becoming unreliable. They're seeing the bottleneck that gets worse, the engineering hold that's keeping production from moving, the material shortage that's going to create a problem next week, and they're seeing the process that takes twice as long as it should. Capacity that's sitting unused, the emergency that's about to happen before it ever shows up on a financial statement. And I think this difference in perspective is one of the reasons we've created such a disconnect between leadership and the production floor. It's not necessarily because leadership doesn't care, and it's not because the people on the production floor don't understand the business. It's because they're often looking at the company through completely different lenses. And I believe that's something we have to address if we're serious about creating the next American manufacturing renaissance through radical alignment. Let's start with leadership. If you're sitting in the C-suite, you can't walk into a board meeting and say, well, the production floor feels pretty good this month. That's not how business works. And you have to bring numbers. Revenue, profitability, margins, EBITDA, forecasts. You have to explain what happened and why. Backed by numbers the finance department has approved. And traditional cost accounting is designed to do that. It gives leadership a structured way to understand the financial performance of the organization. And I'm not here to tell you that cost accounting is wrong. It isn't. It's absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary. The problem is what happens when those numbers become the only lens leadership has for understanding what's happening operationally. Because those financial numbers are largely telling you about what has already happened. By the time you see the impact in the financial results, the operational decisions that created that result may have happened weeks or months earlier. And that's where things get interesting. Because the factory isn't living in the past. Because the factory isn't living in the past, the factory is living in the present. And in many ways, it's telling you about the future. Think about the people closest to the work. The operator knows when a machine doesn't sound right. A supervisor knows when a process is beginning to fall behind. An engineer knows when a reoccurring issue is consuming more resources than it should. A production manager knows which constraint is starting to threaten the schedule, and the planner knows that a particular shortage is going to create a problem 3 weeks from now. None of those things necessarily show up in your financial statements today. But they are incredibly important pieces of information about what your financial results are going to look like tomorrow. That's the distinction I want upper leadership to start thinking about. Your financial department can tell you what happened. Your operation can tell you what's coming. And if leadership only has the first piece of information, they're making decisions with an incomplete picture. This is where throughput accounting becomes so interesting. I'm not suggesting that every CEO needs to become an accountant. I'm not suggesting that traditional cost accounting should disappear. I'm saying that there is another lens that manufacturing leaders should understand. Throughput accounting focuses much more heavily on the impact improvements make on future revenue. And that changes the questions you ask. Instead of, how much does this department cost? You begin asking, what is limiting the system's ability to generate more revenue in the future? Where is your constraint? Where are we losing capacity? What decisions will increase throughput? What decision might make one department look efficient while actually making the overall system worse? Those are very different questions, and they lead to very different decisions. Here's an example. Let's say you have a manufacturing operation with 3 major steps: Department A, Department B, Department C. Department A discovers a way to increase its productivity by 20%. Fantastic. The department celebrates, management celebrates, the efficiency number goes up. Everyone looks good. But Department B is the constraint. It can't process the additional work coming from Department A. So now you've increased the amount of work sitting in front of Department B. You've increased work in process. You've increased waiting and potentially increased handling. You've also potentially increased inventory, and you've accomplished almost nothing for the customer. Department A got more efficient. But the company didn't necessarily get more productive. That's an incredibly important distinction because a manufacturing company is not a collection of independent departments trying to win their individual metrics. It's one system. And if one part of the system wins while the overall system doesn't improve, we haven't really won. We've optimized a piece of the machine instead of the machine itself. Let me give you a real example from my own experience, because this isn't just a theoretical discussion for me. I've facilitated Kaizens in different manufacturing environments, and I've seen some very significant improvements come out of them. Sometimes the improvement is obvious. You reduce scrap, you reduce defects, you reduce material waste, and those savings are relatively easy to calculate and reconcile with finance. But some of the biggest improvements aren't nearly as easy to see on a traditional financial report. One Kaizen I facilitated resulted in a 40% reduction in the amount of time required to train new employees. Think about that for a minute. Think about what that means. A new employee could become effective faster. The company could get productive capacity online sooner, and experienced employees spent less time training and more time doing the work they were actually needed to do. And because people were trained more effectively, there was also less opportunity for mistakes, rework, and defects. Those improvements created real capacity, time savings, increase in throughput. But here's what happened. When the results were presented upward through the organization, the only number that made it to upper management was the reduction in scrap. And yes, there was a scrap reduction. That was real. But it was only one piece of the value that had been created. I actually went to finance and verified the hourly labor rate for the factory workforce. I used that number to calculate the value of the time we were freeing up and the increased capacity created by getting people trained and productive faster. When I calculated that value, the increased capacity and throughput opportunity was more than 8 times the value of the scrap reduction alone. Think about that. The improvement created substantially more value than the number upper leadership was being shown. And that matters because this isn't just a reporting problem, it's a business problem. Leadership may conclude that the Kaizen created a relatively modest return. They may look at that result and say, that's good, but is it really worth investing more resources into this? Meanwhile, the organization has created a much larger capacity opportunity that isn't being recognized. And there's another problem here that I think is even more important. When middle management doesn't feel comfortable presenting the full economic value of an improvement to upper leadership, you've you've created a barrier between reality and decision making. The people closest to the improvement know what it actually created. Middle management may know what it actually created, but the information gets translated into whatever number is easiest to defend. And eventually, upper leadership and the board are making decisions based on an incomplete picture of the value the organization is actually creating. That's misleading and it's bad business. People now, because now you've created this strange situation where one of the best uses of your organization's time. The people doing the work know its value. The production floor feels the improvement. The organization gains capacity, but the financial reporting structure doesn't necessarily make that value visible. So the improvement gets undervalued. And when improvements are consistently undervalued, what happens? People stop investing in them. Kaizens start to become something people do because it's expected. Continuous improvement becomes just another initiative. And eventually, people start asking, why are we spending all this time on improvement when leadership only cares about the numbers? But here's the irony. Leadership does care about the numbers. The problem is that we're not always giving leadership the right numbers to make the right decision. And this brings me to another issue that I think is incredibly important: information. The production floor knows things, but does that information make it all the way to the people making strategic decisions? Sometimes, sometimes not. And sometimes it gets there, but only after it's been filtered through multiple layers of reporting. By then, the information may be weeks old, or the problem may already have become a financial result. And there's another problem. If employees don't believe leadership will listen to them, they eventually stop speaking up. Think about what that means. The people closest to the process, the people who know where the waste is, where the bottlenecks are, where the risks are, and where the opportunities are, stop telling leadership what they're seeing. Not necessarily because they're disengaged. Sometimes it's because they've learned that nobody does anything with the information. They've brought it up before. They've been told, that's a great idea, but we don't have time for that right now. Or let's revisit that after we get through this month's production. Or right now, we just need to hit the numbers. And then the emergency never really ends. So the information stops flowing. And when information stops flowing, leadership's view of reality gets narrower. This is where I think manufacturing leaders need to challenge themselves. We tend to measure what is easy to put on a dashboard: revenue, costs, scrap, defects, on-time delivery, labor efficiency, inventory, and those metrics do matter. But what about the things that aren't so easy to measure? How many hours did your engineering team spend troubleshooting the same problem for the 6th time? How much improvement work didn't happen because everyone was pulled into an emergency? How much capacity was lost because a bottleneck wasn't addressed? How much knowledge disappeared when an experienced employee left? How many problems did employees stop reporting because they didn't believe anything would happen? How much stress in your organization is created by constantly operating in reaction mode? And perhaps the biggest question, how much future capacity are we giving away because we're constantly managing today's crisis? Those costs may not show up neatly on your income statement, but they're real and the people on the production floor know they're real. So now let's come back to the two realities. Leadership is looking at the financial results. The production floor is looking at the operational reality. Leadership sees that the company hit the monthly target, but the production floor knows what it took to get there. Leadership sees that the customer order shipped, but the production floor knows how many workarounds were required to make it happen. Leadership sees the improvement in one department's efficiency. The production floor may know that the constraint didn't change at all. Leadership sees the numbers. The workforce experiences the system. And here's where I want to be very careful. I'm not saying leadership is oblivious because they're bad leaders. Quite the opposite. Most leaders I have worked with are working incredibly hard. They're under tremendous pressure. They're trying to protect customers, profitability, jobs. They're trying to satisfy shareholders and keep the company moving. They're doing the best they can with the information they're being given. That's exactly why the information needs to change. So if you're a manufacturing leader watching this, I want to give you a few questions to take back to your team. Don't just ask, did we hit the number? Ask, what constrained us from producing more? Don't just ask, why did we miss the schedule? Ask, what did the production floor see coming that leadership didn't? Don't wonder, how much did this problem cost? Find out, what future capacity are we losing because we haven't permanently solved it? And don't just ask, how efficient is this department? Ask, is this improvement making the entire system more capable or just one department? And here's the question I might ask most often. What are our financial numbers not telling us? Because I think that's where some of the biggest opportunities in American manufacturing are hiding. And this brings us back to the theme we've been talking about: scarcity versus abundance. If leadership sees productivity primarily as a cost equation, the natural question becomes, how much labor can we eliminate? But what happens when leadership starts seeing productivity as a capacity equation? Now the question becomes, how much more can we create? How many more customers can we serve? Products can we build? Revenue can we generate? How much more can we invest in our people? How many more career opportunities can we create? More resilient can we make the company? That's a completely different mindset. And I believe American manufacturing desperately needs that shift, because we don't have to choose between productivity and people. We don't have to choose between profitability and job security. We don't have to choose between efficiency and a fulfilling workforce. The opportunity is to create enough alignment that those things actually reinforce one another. And this is why I think throughput accounting can be so valuable. Not because it replaces traditional cost accounting, it doesn't, and not because every manufacturing leader needs to become an expert in it, but because it can give leadership another way to understand the economic consequences of operational decisions. It can help connect what the production floor is seeing with what the executive team needs to understand. Instead of only asking, what did this improvement save us? We can also ask, what did this improvement allow us to do? That's a very different thought process. It moves the conversation from historical cost to future opportunity, from expense to capacity, from scarcity to growth. And that is exactly the conversation I want more American manufacturers to have. And that's what I mean when I talk about radical alignment. It's not another lean tool or Six Sigma initiative or software package. It's not another poster on the wall or leadership philosophy. It's the decision to align the information, incentives, measurements, priorities, and behaviors of the organization around one common objective: creating a stronger, more capable, more abundant company. And when leadership starts seeing the entire system, when information flows freely, when employees trust that improvement isn't going to automatically threaten their livelihood, when productivity creates capacity instead of simply eliminating labor, when departments stop optimizing themselves and start optimizing the whole, something changes. The organization starts becoming capable of growth without constantly requiring more people, more buildings, more equipment, or more heroics. That's the opportunity. Your financial statements matter, as does EBITDA, margins, and cost structure. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But if those are the only lenses leadership has for understanding the business, they're missing an enormous amount of information. Your factory is constantly telling you what your financial statements haven't told you yet. Are you listening to your factory? Because if we're going to move American manufacturing from scarcity to abundance, if we're going to create companies where productivity creates opportunity instead of fear, if we're going to build organizations where people can have fulfilling careers instead of constantly wondering when the next restructuring is coming, we have to start seeing the entire system. We have to connect the boardroom to the production floor. We have to connect financial performance with the operational reality. And we have to create leadership alignment around the future, not just accountability for the past. And I believe that's possible. I believe American manufacturing has enormous untapped capacity. And I believe our best manufacturing days are still ahead of us. Every week, I'm going to show up here. Every week, I'm going to keep showing up here and exploring the ideas, leadership practices, and systems that I believe can help us get there. If you believe America can lead the world in manufacturing again, join me. Join the movement. It's